Joining me today on the Capital TV show, Josh Block, adjunct fellow Hudson Institute, and he's former spokesman for the State Department. Hello, Josh.
Hello.
Let's talk about what happened in Mar-a-Lago. The FBI raided the house of the former President Donald Trump, and maybe you're gonna be the candidate for 2024.
Well, obviously, it's a very sensitive situation. Anytime someone like a former president is subject to a subpoena and to an FBI raid or an FBI warrant served on their residence, including apparently accessing the former president's safe and personal files and things belonging to associates in the same regard. You know, I don't have the details, of course, of what they think they're looking for. Or the motives of the Attorney General, who just a few minutes ago acknowledged that he himself personally authorized the subpoena and the raid on the president's residence, former president's residence. That's a very serious decision to be made by any law enforcement official, especially the Attorney General of the United States. So it leads me to believe that they had some reason to be looking there. On the other hand, it's rather unclear what kind of documents they seem to be searching for. You know, a former president certainly has the prerogative to keep certain materials from his time in office. You know, and I again, it's a little beyond my knowledge of what it is they think that they're looking for. What could be so sensitive that the Justice Department feels comfortable issuing a subpoena and sending the FBI into a former president's residence? As you may know, I'm not a Republican. I've been a Democrat for many years in electoral politics, but I find this move to be very serious and somewhat concerning. I don't have enough information about it to evaluate their choices, but it does have the appearance of being politically motivated. You know, I think anyone who watches the American politics and has seen, you know, the events of the last 6 years or so, including both the false allegations by the FBI that the former president and his campaign was working in coordination with Russia, which of course turned out not to be the case. The Foreign, you know, Surveillance Act warrant that they obtained with false information provided to that court is a troubling record. You know, don't forget the FBI itself does have a history of political pursuit, including Martin Luther King and other former prominent Americans who were in the crosshairs of the political leadership, if you will, of the FBI. So I think we need to take this move with a grain of salt. I don't think we ought to rush to the conclusion that there was something incredibly wrong with what the former president has done. He's certainly someone controversial, though.
And let's wait and see. Another hit news about the Iranian person who was trying to assassinate John Bolton. The U.S. Justice Department charged him, and also we heard from Mike Pompeo team that he was targeted in an Iranian assassination plot. Iran is a danger to the U.S. first, no?
Well, the Iran is a danger to the United States. As a colleague of former Secretary Pompeo's here at the Hudson Institute, I take these matters very, very seriously. You know, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, you know, we've held other positions of great prominence and importance in America's national security apparatus over many years. You know, these are extremely serious concerns. And as you may know, the Iranians also sent an armed terrorist to the home of a prominent dissident in New York recently, including, you know, he tried to go into her home. He was armed with a weapon. This is the same regime that plotted her kidnapping on the streets of New York and wanted to smuggle her onto a cargo ship. The regime is very dangerous. These are people who are not kidding when they say they want to inflict harm on Americans, on other people in the world. And I think, you know, we ought to take very seriously the threat posed by a regime who doesn't yet have a nuclear weapon. What will they be like if they were to obtain one? These are very serious questions, and I think it's the reason we can never let them get there.
There is a question has to be raised. Why does the U.S. still desperately seek to empower Ayatollah regime with the worthless Iranian deal or nuclear deal?
It's a very serious concern. I mean, the last time when the Obama administration, many of whose staffers remain in positions of importance in this Biden administration, gave Iran billions of dollars as a result of a worthless nuclear accord the last time. The regime in Iran used that money to support the murder of hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, to advance their nuclear weapons program, to advance their ballistic missile program, to support the Houthi terrorists in Yemen, to support Hezbollah terrorists who are destroying the fabric of Lebanon. And I think, we ought to be very concerned, not just about Iran's capacity to create destruction around the world with nuclear weapons, but with conventional weapons. And we need to get back to imposing the embargoes on Iran for weapons and missiles and other things that had been removed erroneously in the previous agreement. So we're going backwards, not in the right direction with the idea of a new accord.
You mentioned the Houthis in Yemen, who are responsible of many violations, human rights violations, especially like killing women, kidnapping, raping women, imprisoning women, drug dealing, recruiting children in war. Why some leftist human rights, so-called human rights, are targeting only UAE and Saudi Arabia, knowing that UAE entered the Yemen war to defend the legitimacy?
I think there's a deep, deep misconception among folks who claim to be human rights advocates in the United States about the role of Iran and who the Houthi rebels really are. I don't need to tell you or your viewers what their flag says. Americans may not realize what it says: death to America, death to the Jews. These are not peaceful people. They're not seeking to run a country with the best interests of its citizens in mind. They're a terrorist organization that's seeking to acquire the weapons of state, the legitimacy of statehood. And we ought to be very concerned that people like, certain senators in the Democratic Party seem to be more sympathetic to that regime and those efforts than they are to American allies like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who are, of course, becoming forces of modernity and stability in a Middle East that very much needs that kind of progress. So I agree. It is incredibly troubling to see the criticism of the Biden administration making its efforts to repair the relationship with the Saudi government that they had so badly damaged, and to undermine the relationship between the United States and the United Arab Emirates, who are providing tremendous leadership in the Middle East in terms of modernizing the relationships that exist across the region. It needs to be called out more directly. The Houthis need to be called terrorists, and we ought to say so without apology.
What does it mean that the State Department has approved a deal of for two countries, for the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, for almost $5 billion? Is this the result for the Biden trip to the Middle East and meeting with this leader?
Well, certainly American support for Saudi Arabia and its defense needs to be rock solid. And as we see the relationships between key Arab allies in the Middle East solidifying with Israel, who's of course been our closest ally in the region for many, many years, we need to support that process. It is inconceivable to me that this administration, when it first came into office, wouldn't even say the words Abraham Accords. And it's a political choice. There are many holdovers in this administration from the Obama administration. Their view of the Middle East was extremely disconcerting. The belief and the actions that the former president and his staff took to undermine America's relationship with our longstanding Arab allies in favor of cozying up to Iran, who is still the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world, is not just illogical, but it's un-American. And it's bad for the people of the region. It's anti-human rights. So when you hear people suggesting that they're in favor of human rights, and yet they wouldn't oppose the kind of terrorism that was being wreaked by the regime in Iran, as it was supporting the slaughter of Syrians by Assad, and it supported the emergence of ISIS while claiming to fight them. I mean, talk about a hypocritical thing. Your alarm bells need to go off. Common sense demands that we stand with the countries that are working towards stability, modernity, and relationships in the region that will enhance America's position and undermine those of our enemies. And Iran is our enemy, no question about it.
As a Jew, how do you assess the results or the Abraham Accords, a new step for peace in the Middle East?
There's no question that the relationship between Israel and our Arab allies, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United Emirates, Bahrain, and others, is extremely important to America's national security, let alone the security of the people who live in those countries themselves. And the Europeans, who are somewhat reluctantly supporting this process as well, need to wake up. If they think that by providing Iran a new nuclear accord that will weaken that process and undermine the strength of the Western alliance in the Middle East is the right thing to do, we ought to be very concerned. This is the same Europe, by the way, that for many, many decades now refused to strengthen their own defenses and even live up to their own commitments in NATO. What happened then? We saw Russia increase its aggression in the continent. We've seen the suffering and terrible results that have going on with Ukraine. And I think that those who are critical of the Abraham Accords should ask themselves: Does the United States, does NATO, do the Western allies want to face a new nuclear axis of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea? If the answer is yes, then we're going in the right direction by undermining the accords and helping Iran get to a place of nuclear capability, nuclear weapons capability. If the answer is that we want to live in a world in which Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, who are the world's most irresponsible actors, are defanged and don't have the opportunity to create a nuclear alliance that will threaten the entire world. I mean, we're not talking about just this, we're talking about trade, economics, the secure, everything. And we're playing with fire. You see how rambunctious China has gotten just by Nancy Pelosi landing for a visit in Taiwan. Yeah. What happens when they decide they want to invade Taiwan and Russia threatens to go nuclear on the Baltics and Iran threatens to wipe out the Saudi oil fields with a nuclear weapon? We don't want to get to that place. And if we don't want to get there, we better act now to stop it.
Exactly. It's very interesting, but let me, because I have a short time, ask you something about Vision 2030. Why the Biden administration underestimate the efforts of the Crown Prince in the reforms that he added to his country?
I think it's incredibly impressive to the vision that the Crown Prince is providing for not just Saudi Arabia, but for the region, in terms of understanding that investing in human capital, that investing in human promise, in education, in technology, in growth, in environmentally interesting approaches to innovation, it's an incredibly bold vision, and I think we all ought to applaud the effort there. And to see the administration questioning it or undermining it, to me speaks to kind of the legacy of those in the administration who have never seen the Saudi Arabia as our friend, and for whatever reason believed, and as they expressed in the Baker Hamilton report after the Iraq War, see somehow Iran or Syria as closer, as better allies to America. I mean, it is so disturbed. It's really hard to understand. So I think sometimes there's a legacy of that. And of course, the way that the media manipulated the Khashoggi events is kind of evidence of that. There's almost no discussion in the United States of Khashoggi being an ally of ISIS, of Khashoggi having been one of the most radical Islamists operating in the public space and working to publicly undermine the Saudi regime on behalf of his Qatari paymasters. The Washington Post only finally acknowledged his relationship with the Qatari government in the very end of an article, 9 weeks after their campaign against Saudi Arabia and everyone in the country who was working with them. It's an incredibly disingenuous effort to portray this person, as a saint. This was no journalist. He was a spy working for the Qatari government. Let's just play a thought experiment, if you will. If there was an American spy who, after his working for the American government, decided he didn't like our policies and he went to work for the Russians and was getting paid by the Russians, would we not have rendered him home? Would America not have seen that person as a traitor? There's no difference in what happened here. None at all. And so the hypocrisy of this idea that somehow, that he was a martyr or a saint or someone who was taken advantage of is ludicrous on its face. And those who perpetuate that idea are doing no service to American national security, no service to the need for America to deepen its relationships with those in the Middle East who seek peace. And like the Crown Prince is pursuing with Vision 2030, are seeking to modernize their countries, invest in human capital, and develop an economy that doesn't rest purely on petrochemicals, but more on trade, more on investment, more on interconnectedness with others in the region. And I have to say, I was in Dubai and Abu Dhabi not just a few months ago, and to see the degree to which the governments there are investing in human capital. I went into a mall in Dubai, and what I saw was a coding academy, a co-working space for kids 16 to 24, an office adjacent to it that would help you start any business you wanted to start. This is a place where they're investing in human capital. It's not like a regime in Tehran that's starving its people of water, of gas, of bread, and taking that money to build nuclear weapons or spend it on the Houthis or Hezbollah. And so when you look at a regime like Saudi Arabia, where it's saying, this is our vision, this is our future, this is the direction we want to go, America should be applauding that effort and supporting it. And if you believe and if you're an environmentalist and you want to see a reduction in petrochemicals, then you ought to be twice as enthusiastic for what the Crown Prince is trying to do.
Exactly. Josh, it's a very important approach. This leads me to ask you a question on Asim Ghafour, the lawyer. He's the lawyer of Jamal Khashoggi. He's detained and accused by money laundering in UAE. UAE is advanced in human rights issue. It's a country who respects women. They have half of women in the parliament or represented in many businesses. So how do you see the situation and UAE defending human rights and also working on not politicizing the issue of Asim Ghafour?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think one of the things that you see when you visit Abu Dhabi, Dubai, other parts of the United Emirates is the radical tolerance. I mean, I think it's really people don't recognize the things that you just remarked. That women are in positions of leadership, women are sheikhs. This is not a place where there's repression in this regard. It's in fact a very open economy and one in which people have real opportunity. And I think, not understanding the changes that are taking place in countries like this leads people to misunderstand what's happening. It was the UAE and others in the Gulf, who identified CARE as an Islamist organization operating in the United States. And what is it that they know that we don't? It leads you to believe that there are very smart folks who are willing to make difficult decisions and say things that are unpopular, just like when they imprison someone like that attorney who's been engaged in money laundering, supporting terrorism, acting in a way as a propagandist for ISIS and other Islamists. There's a reason that people like that are in prison. It's not arbitrary. And in a country like the United Arab Emirates, where, while we may have a different, sort of system of justice, there's no question that there is a reasonable governance in place, and folks who are making real decisions, sometimes difficult ones, to ensure the safety and stability of their people, their government, and our allies. Those who walk around pointing fingers and pretending that they know better from thousands of miles away are acting in pure political propagandist efforts. So the condemnation of a government for arresting someone who's known to be an associate of Islamist terrorists like ISIS, again, ISIS has killed more Americans than any organization in the world except Hezbollah. Hezbollah has killed more Americans than anybody except ISIS. And these two organizations are the product of Iranian propaganda. The notion that Iran was the enemy of ISIS is belied by the fact that they were providing the Syrian regime with weapons and money with which the Syrian regime turned around and didn't fight ISIS, but paid them for oil and allowed them to buy more weapons and attack the other factions that were opposing the repression that was taking place. So again, Bob Ford, who was America's ambassador to Syria, quit his job because of the Obama administration's hypocrisy and failure to tell the truth about these things. And in the same vein, 6 years later or whatever it is, we see the same voices rising up, attacking those who would support countries in the region like Saudi Arabia, like the United Emirates, who are taking a firm stand against Islamists, and whether they're the Houthis or whether they're people like associates of Khashoggi who want to pretend that they're martyrs, but in fact are operating in an effort to undermine the very regimes that are working for stability and evolution and making nice with Israel and supporting American policy in the region. It's hypocrisy on its face.
Josh, I want to thank you so much for this interview. I know now it's our vacation time, and thank you for answering my call and being with me on my show.
It's my pleasure to join you, and I commend you for your work. I'm pleased to be a guest. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, Maria Malouf here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Malouf TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.